Hello. Welcome back. I'm hoping for a nice, smooth 50 minutes, standard, no interruptions. Let's see how it goes. Pretty good. Let's see. I sent you an email an hour or so ago, recon feedback. So in order to download your essays section, or TA by TA, GSI by GSI, I had to create 12 different copies of the assignment. So when you go on B courses now, you'll see comprehensive essay, Eric's students only, comprehensive essay, Jeanette's students only, comprehensive essay, Nikhil's students only. So you don't have to submit your essay 12 times, you have to submit it once, but please submit it to the right place, right? So submit it to the one that says those students, and that way we're going to be able to download the essays GSI by GSI, because B courses has no way to allow us to split up 720 assignments into 12 groups otherwise. So I put that all in an email, and otherwise I think we're ready to rock and roll. Oh, I was going to talk a little bit about the essay. So we handed out the essay on Monday. There were so many other things going on, I forgot to talk about it. If you didn't get a copy, it's on the website. There are extra copies up here on the stage. Let's see what I want to tell you. So there's two pieces left. One is the essay, which is due Thursday the 11th, Thursday of our week, at midnight, so a minute before midnight, so we know which 12 o'clock it is. On B courses, as I just explained. You need to follow the prompt. So the prompt is there. The prompt is also on the website if you lose a piece of paper. I think it's pretty much self-explanatory from there, I think. If you have questions about the essay, PIATS is really good for that, because then when I answer the question, it gets answered for everybody in writing once. And then the exam itself is on Tuesday the 16th. It's in the RSF Fieldhouse. The RSF Fieldhouse is, they do not want you to go through the RSF to get to it. So the RSF Fieldhouse is a big room where you can play basketball and so on once you're inside the RSF, but they want you to access it from outside. On the course website, there's a little map that shows you how to get there. If you walk down Bancroft, you've seen the things that I think of as a huge robotic antenna. So they look like the antenna on a snail that's like some robotic snail that's like bigger than all of us put together. Those are actually, I don't know what they are, air vents, but I think they're antenna from a robotic snail. The entry doors to the RSF Fieldhouse are right by that. There's usually signs to guide you there. That's all. That's what I know. Okay, so what are we doing? We're wrapping it all up. So here we go. We're going to start with, clicker question. You've seen this one before. I'm aiming for a better percentage here. When the Fed increases interest rates, what happens? A, investment decreases and net exports decrease. B, investment decreases and net exports increase. C, investment increases and net exports decrease. D, investment increases and net exports increase. E, yes indeed, this is the third day in a row she's asked this very same question. Hint. A, B, C, D, or E, I suppose. In 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, and stop. Getting better. That's good. So A, we know, is the right one. 81%, so that's better than day 1, which was 50-something. It's better than day 2, which was 64. We're getting there. I'd be really happy if it was 100%, but it's never 100% because there's always people who just push some button randomly. So let's see. So what we're talking about is Federal Reserve policy, and we ended on Monday by talking about, among many other things, the Phillips curve. So, oops, sorry, you don't know it that way. Erase. There. Which has the inflation rate on the vertical axis and the unemployment rate on the horizontal axis in some downward sloping curve. I usually draw it nonlinear. It actually is nonlinear. Does it matter if you draw it nonlinear or linear? No, just make sure it's got a downward slope. So that's a standard Phillips curve. And if the inflationary expectations, if costs of inputs due to supply shocks and external demand, and if what was the third one, labor productivity growth are all stable, then we have a stable Phillips curve. If any of those three things is changing, then it shifts the Phillips curve. So let's see how this works in terms of the Fed conducting policy. So suppose that the Fed observes that the inflation rate is up. So none of those other three things have happened, but the Fed observes that the inflation rate is up. So for instance, the economy starts at some point A. So choose some point A that's sort of down to the right on your Phillips curve. That corresponds, dashing it over, to an unemployment rate, which I'll call U sub A, and inflation rate, inflation sub A. And then the Fed observes subsequently to that the inflation rate has risen, that we are now at a point like B, where dashing it over and dashing it down, we have a higher inflation rate, inflation sub B, and a lower unemployment rate, unemployment sub B. The reaction to that on the part of the Fed is to undertake contractionary monetary policy. The Fed's the only group in the economy that, the central bank generally in the United States, the Fed, is the only group in the economy that can really do anything about inflation. And so the Fed, observing this higher inflation rate, would undertake contractionary monetary policy. They would raise interest rates, knowing full well that that increase in interest rates would lead to decreases in investment and net exports, and through the multiplier, decreases in consumption and imports, and all of that together would lead to decreases in GDP, which would mean there would be fewer people employed, which would mean there would be more people unemployed, so unemployment rate would rise. And that slack that would thus be created in the labor markets would take some pressure off of wages, and so wages wouldn't rise as quickly, and therefore prices wouldn't rise as quickly. And the Fed, by undertaking, so it decreases inflation. So the Fed, by undertaking this contractionary monetary policy, could march the economy back down the Phillips curve, back to a point like A. And so if we look at what's the net effect of the policy, well, if we look at it from what's happening from A to B, and then to the end point here is they're going back to A. So there'd be actually, in this case, there'd be no net change in unemployment, no net change in inflation. We'd be back where we began as a result of, due to higher unemployment, which is what causes the inflation rate to fall from B to A. So when the Fed observes higher inflation, in this case, it would be due to increases in aggregate demand. So when the Fed observes higher inflation due to increases in aggregate demand, the Fed can fight the inflation by bringing about a decrease in aggregate demand. They increase interest rates, those higher interest rates decrease aggregate demand, multiplier effects affect GDP, that all affects unemployment, which affects inflation. So here's a quick clicker question. When the Fed increases interest rates, when the Fed does that increasing in interest rates, when the Fed increases interest rates, how do we show that? Is that a movement down along the Phillips curve? Is that a movement up along the Phillips curve? Is it shifting to a higher Phillips curve? Is it shifting down to a lower Phillips curve? And let's hope nobody's clicking on E. When the Fed increases interest rates, how do we show it on the Phillips curve? A, B, C, D. Not E, don't do E. 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003. You're going to make me weep? Seriously? No. Okay, let's go back and look at it. When the Fed increases interest rates, that increase in interest rates leads to an increase in unemployment. So we're moving down. See the little arrows here? We're moving down along a Phillips curve. So the right answer is moving down along the Phillips curve. 60% get a nice big happy face, 40% you're making me weep. Don't make me weep. It's the last day. It's raining. Okay, let's try another one. That line's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to come in later. That fight of saying, oh my gosh, aggregate demand went up, inflation went up, let's fight it. That's a pretty straightforward fight for the Fed. There's no unpleasant choices in that one. Some fights, though, are much less pleasant or unpleasant. Suppose that the event is that there's an increase in inflationary expectations, and in this case I said suppose it's due to some cost shock. So there's a big decrease in the supply of oil, which is the primary input to production, resulting in a jump in the price of oil. People look at this and go, oh my god, the price of gas is going back up to $5 a gallon. I think the inflation rate's going to be 7% instead of 2%. So we have higher inflationary expectations. So again, inflation on the vertical, unemployment on the horizontal. We've got some initial Phillips curve, PC1. Choose some point on that Phillips curve, call it A. dash it over, dash it down, we're at inflation rate A and unemployment rate A. And then as a result of the event, the entire Phillips curve shifts up. So we've got a new Phillips curve PC2 that's above the old Phillips curve. The immediate effect of this higher cost of inputs coupled with a rise in inflationary expectations, you can think of it as taking and moving the economy straight up. So go from unemployment A straight up and call that B. And so we've got inflation rate B still at unemployment rate A. The Fed's going to fight back. Oh, here. This thing right down here. This takes us from point A to point B. The Fed's going to fight back because there's higher inflation, in particular there's higher inflationary expectations, and the Fed doesn't like high inflation, and they really don't like high inflationary expectations. They hate it when the Phillips curve shifts up. They're going to fight back by increasing interest rates, which has the same effect that it had on the previous slide. The increase in interest rates decreases aggregate demand, which through the multiplier decreases output, which means lower employment, which means higher unemployment, which takes some pressure off of wages and prices and decreases the inflation rate. But where's the Fed going? They're marching down this new higher PC2. And where we wind up is going to be some combination of unemployment and inflation on that new higher Phillips curve. You could, if you want, you could take it all the way back down to the original inflation rate. I'm going to just bring it down someplace in the middle to a point like C. So they're marching down that new higher Phillips curve. You wind up with an inflation rate, which I'll call inflation rate C, and an unemployment rate C. As a result of the increase in inflationary expectations, coupled with the Fed's reaction to that, the net effect, when we look at what's the effect if we go from the original point A to the end point, which is C, the net effect of that is the unemployment rate has gone up and the inflation rate has gone up. The Fed hates this fight. Everybody hates the Fed, so they hate it too. They do this, they increase interest rates, and what do people see? They observe that the unemployment rate has gone up because the higher interest rates choke off some aggregate demand, and they observe that the inflation rate is higher than it was before the Fed took their action. Yeah, the inflation rate is lower than it would have been, B, if the Fed had done nothing. But people who are reading the news, they don't see the counterfactual. Point B, that's the counterfactual. That's where we would be if the Fed did nothing. All that people observe is people observe what is. So people observe point A, that's the unemployment rate and the inflation rate that existed. People observe point C, that's the unemployment rate and the inflation rate that exists. People don't observe the counterfactual. And so everybody hates the Fed. Everybody said, you go to Thanksgiving and your brother says, oh my God, you're an economist. What are these people doing? Don't you know these people? Can't you talk to her? It's like, time out, not my job, not my job. But they hate this because they have wound up increasing unemployment and increasing inflation. Now, in those cases, in these kinds of situations, the Fed doesn't what I call slay the inflation rate. That is to say, they're not going to raise the unemployment rate so much. So I'm going to call this the slay point. Slay inflation. They don't raise the unemployment rate so much that they bring the inflation rate back down to where it was initially. Typically because the costs of that in terms of human suffering from unemployment are far too great. So in situations like this where the Phillips curve is shifted up, the Fed fights, but they don't slay the inflation. They fight the inflation that's lower than it would have been if the Fed had done nothing, but they don't typically bring it all the way back down to where it started from because the cost of that in terms of humans, people, you and me, people, losing their jobs is just too high. One way that we can capture the decisions that the Fed makes about what to do with interest rates is with this thing that's called the Taylor rule. So it's in the problem set. You've been playing with it in the problem set. The Taylor rule comes from work by John Taylor, who's an economist down at Stanford. There we go. Had to get it out. He's an economist down at Stanford, and he looked at the values for the United States. He looked at what's the inflation rate goal, what's the unemployment rate, what's the goal for unemployment, and what does the Fed set in terms of their target for the Federal Reserve, the federal funds rate. And what he found was there was a pretty stable relationship between what the target rate was that the Fed set and what the actual inflation versus the goal and the actual unemployment versus the goal was. So you can think of it in general, sort of generally. How much room do I have? Hold on, let me see how much room I have. Okay, good. You can think of it generally as the federal funds rate target is equal to some neutral rate for the interest rate, for the federal funds rate, plus some coefficient, something that measures how strongly they react, so A, I'm going to call it, times the difference between the actual and the goal inflation rate, minus some other factor, let's call it B, times the difference, I'm running out of space here, between the actual and the goal unemployment rate. So if the inflation rate equals what the Fed wants it to be, and if the unemployment rate equals what the Fed wants it to be, then the target for the federal funds rate will be just what the neutral rate is, which is around 4.5% or so. If inflation is high, so if the actual inflation rate is in excess of the goal, they're going to increase the federal funds rate target to fight the inflation. If the unemployment rate is high, if unemployment is above the goal for the unemployment rate, they're going to decrease the federal funds rate target as a way of trying to fight unemployment. That's pretty straightforward. On the problem set, you had actual numbers for this that have been estimated. You had that it was 2.07 plus 1.28 times the inflation rate minus 1.95 times the actual unemployment rate minus the goal, which is 5%. That formulation that you have on the problem set doesn't include a goal for the inflation rate. The goal for the inflation rate is 2%. So if I put that in there and just do a little bit of math back and forth, I get this 4.63 plus 1.28 times the inflation rate minus the goal, which is 2, minus 1.95 times the unemployment rate minus the goal, which is 5. It's straightforward, knowing what to do if the unemployment rate is up and the inflation rate is down, or if the inflation rate is up and the unemployment rate is down. That is, if the economy is moving along a stable Phillips curve, it's pretty straightforward. The Fed knows what to do to get back to their original goal. The problems come when the economy is experiencing simultaneously higher unemployment and higher inflation. Because higher unemployment means the Fed should lower the federal funds rate target, and higher inflation means the Fed should raise the federal funds rate target. And so then what we need to know is who are the people who are making the decision. Remember this decision about the federal funds rate target. This decision is made by 12 people. There's just 12 people. There's the 7 people on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve, the president of the New York City Federal Reserve Bank, and then 4 of the other 11 Federal Reserve Bank presidents. Those 12 people, they're the ones that are voting, deciding what to do with the federal funds rate target. And so what we talk about, and what the press talks about, is whether or not these 12 members of the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee, whether they're inflation hawks or inflation doves. Hawks and doves. So let's think about these birds. So hawks. What are hawks? Hawks are big birds, big wings. Hawks are big birds. They sort of float on the air above an open field, watching carefully, soaring majestically, and then all of a sudden they see a mouse and they swoop down and they grab it in their talons and they come and they eat it. That's a hawk. Doves. Woo, 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 woo. Doves are the birds of love. Woo, woo, woo. Doves are always found in pairs. Woo, woo. They mate for life. Woo, woo. Doves are the birds of love. Doves are the birds of love. No one ever put a hawk on their wedding cake, but they do put doves on their wedding cake. What does this have to do with inflation? Inflation hawks are those people who want to swoop down and slay the inflation. They hate inflation, just like hawks like to slay the mice. The hawks want to swoop down, they want to slay the inflation. They see a little bit of inflation, they want to jack those interest rates up and get rid of that inflation. The doves recognize that indeed it's important to eat. Yes, it is important to eat, but slaying, oh, not about love. That slaying, for doves, the doves don't like inflation, but they're aware of the pain that is created by the slaying. The slaying process creates pain. And so the doves, they want to have some awareness that there is a human cost, coming back to inflation, that there is a human cost, which is higher unemployment, to this process of fighting inflation. And so for the doves, they will put a little larger weight on the cost of higher unemployment than the hawks do. Hawks and doves. When the FOMC is dominated by inflation hawks, you will see a Fed that aggressively increases interest rates in response to even the slightest increase in the inflation rate. When you see an FOMC that is dominated by doves, you'll see a Fed that is more hesitant to increase interest rates, a Fed that is wanting to make sure that their policies encourage full employment, even if that comes with a little bit of higher inflation. Hawks and doves. Clicker question. What do birds have to do with economics? A, not a lot. B, it's all supply and demand. C, how do the seagulls know when a sporting event is almost over? I know it's kind of a random option. I needed 5 options. D, no one ever put a hawk on their wedding cake. E is the last clicker question of the term. Aww. A, B, C, D, or E? 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. I'll just show you what you got. There we go. I just want to have fun with the last one. So nobody ever did put a hawk on there. I hope no one ever put a hawk on their wedding cake. Doves are the birds of love. All right. So let's bring together all of this stuff that we've done from the beginning to the end and think about how is this stuff supposed to work. Well, this is what's supposed to happen. The Fed's goal is an inflation rate of 2% and an unemployment rate somewhere in the 5 to 6% range. And so the Fed targets the federal funds rate. Their action affects interest rates, including the rate at which the government borrows. Then we have market forces. We saw those in the yield curve. Market forces that determine the long-term interest rates, and exchange rates change. Those things happen all at the same time. In response to those two effects, investment and net export spending will change, will respond. Through the multiplier, GDP changes. Employment changes when there's more or less GDP, and unemployment changes as well. That's going to impact wages, and that effect on wages is going to carry through to an effect on inflation. That's what's supposed to happen. So if the Fed sees high unemployment, it can lower interest rates. Those lower interest rates, when you run it through, they target a lower federal funds rate. That affects how much the government pays to borrow. That lowers long-term interest rates. It affects exchange rates. Investment and net export spending rise. Through the multiplier, GDP changes. Employment goes up. Unemployment goes down. Wages rise up a little bit. Inflation goes up a little bit. And voila, everything is hunky-dory. If the world had worked the way it was supposed to in 2009, that's what would have happened. And by 2010, we would have been back to full employment, and everything would have been lovely. So I'm going to do the order I have this in, because I was aware of the time. The order I have this in is first I've got why it was so hard to come to recovery after 2009, and then I've got it backwards chronologically. So I've got the challenges of the recovery first, and then I've got how to get into this next second. Okay, so what are the challenges? Well, one challenge we talked about already, and that was that lenders were not lending. This was the essence of the credit crisis. Investment and net exports, those things do depend upon interest rates. If interest rates go down, there should be more investment and more net exports if the lenders are lending. Things are better now than they were in 2009, but there are still really tight lending standards today, which are affecting particularly homeowners and small businesses. There's a wonderful story that's going around, I think amongst everybody, but particularly amongst economists. Ben Bernanke, who was until recently the chair of the Federal Reserve, tried to get a mortgage to buy a house. Okay, so the guy's like a Princeton professor, but the last 8 years he was chair of the Federal Reserve Board, and he just left that job in the last year, and now his income is largely from speaker's fees. He makes a lot of money giving little speeches, makes enormous amounts of money per speech, but it's not regular income. He doesn't have a regular employer, and so when he went down to get a mortgage to buy a house, denied. The guy who was like the most powerful central banker in the world can't get a mortgage to buy a house because he doesn't have a stable employment history, because he just left the job that he'd had for 8 years, and because the income that he has is self-employment income, and you can't really, there's no way to predict whether or not he's going to get another speech and another speaker's fee. So we have tight lending standards, which are still impacting behavior. And we saw this graph before that showed the excess reserves and the banks not lending their excess reserves, which is the data that supports this notion that the banks are not lending. Another challenge is the Fed couldn't always achieve their target for the federal funds rate. So the Fed targeted the federal funds rate, but as we know, the actual federal funds rate is determined by the supply and demand of excess reserves. The banks that are lending to other banks, they're the ones that actually determine what the federal funds rate is going to be. And what we found during the crisis was the Fed could not achieve their target. So on this chart, the nice straight line, pink, I think it looks pinkish to me, is the target rate. So that's what the Federal Reserve has announced for what rate they want the federal funds rate to be. And then these little dots here, that's the actual federal funds rate on any given day. So what's the average federal funds rate on any given day, looking at the transactions between banks and what are the averages? And you notice, if I had extended it back before 2007, it would look a lot like this, where the actual federal funds rate hugs the target rate. And it's all just right around there, and there's a lot of times when you can't see the difference. But notice what we get. So here's the first thing. August of 2007 was when the European Central Bank, which is the European equivalent of the Fed, the European Central Bank said to its banks, we think these American mortgage-backed securities, which I'll define in a few minutes, we think that these American mortgage-backed securities that the banks have on their balance sheets, we think they're really bad. We think they're very junky assets. We think there's a very high risk of default on these American mortgage-backed securities. They were right, there was. And we, the Central Bank of Europe, want our banks who have these things on their balance sheet to have a whole lot set aside, a whole lot of funds set aside in case these assets do default. So this is an announcement. I consider it to be like the story of the emperor who has no clothes. So many of you, I hope, heard the story when you were little of the emperor who has no clothes. Oh my gosh, okay. Get your blankie and pull up a seat. So, all right. So, give or take, this is how it goes. There was an emperor, he was kind of dumb. There was an emperor many, many years ago, and the emperor wanted to have a coat of gold. And so the emperor hired these two sewers, tailors to make this cloak of gold for the emperor. But the tailors were crooks, and the tailors said, give us your money, and we will make you this cloak of gold. And they took the money, and they weren't going to make the cloak of gold. And so they took the money, and they spent the money, but they didn't make the cloak of gold. And they came in to the emperor who wanted to try on his cloak, and they came in, it was kind of like Harry Potter's invisibility blanket, or whatever that was called, invisibility shield. So they came in with like about as much of a cloak as I have right here.